turn 4 of Across the Bug River. Game from VUCA Simulations, looking at the early days of Barbarossa and the German advances through the eastern side of Poland, through into the Soviet Union itself. The situation at the moment is the varying forces of the Germans. We have some panzers and some infantry down here, and the same up here. I've had mixed success getting across the river. The river of the title runs up here, and we got across. We're attacking deep into Soviet territory now, and the Soviets are trying very hard to stop them, and mostly not having a great deal of success at doing that, with the possible exception of up here, where the 14th Panzer Divisions have really struggled to get going up until the last turn. So, what are we going to do in turn 4? Well, we've had some replacement points. Sorry, not replacement points. We don't get replacement points as the Germans, but for the Soviets, I've cannibalised the remaining NKVD units and supported some of the weakened units that were up here with the points that were available from those NKVD border guards. And the Germans really don't have any more reinforcements now. They've had everything they're going to get the entire game, except for the occasional replacement points in turn 5 next turn, and then turn 7, which is the last turn. The Soviets, however, have had some reinforcements, and they've had the remains of the 135th Rifles, and they are these units here underneath that hex. That's where the 135th Rifles are. However, the replacements or the reinforcements for them are not actually anywhere near them currently. They're over here with some fairly wooded terrain, and also sort of over here. Terrain's not such a terrible thing for the infantry as it is for the motorised units, but certainly far enough away for the panzers here to cause horrendous problems for those 135th Rifles around the key hex this turn, which is Lukaci, the conditional victory point hex for the Germans. The previous conditional victory hexes at Volodymyr Volynski are no longer relevant for VPs, and we instead are turning our attention to this hex, but also the occasional dotted hex here and there on the eastern side of the map, which are going to be victory point hexes at the end of the game. Now, those 135th Rifles are relatively strong. I mentioned that at the beginning of the last video, but they are kind of a bit out of the way at the moment. But thinking about the next turn and more units that are coming on next turn. Now these guys are coming on not so much to the east, but this division here at least. I think it's those ones, possibly the tanks. They're sort of, yes, these ones here. They're starting to come on more at the top here, which is impossible to see with my arm in the way, but nearer the top there, and they're going to come down here. Now, I wonder, as a way for the Soviets to stop this relentless German advance, if those reinforcements to the north can come and break the chain of command that's needed to score those victory points. We shall see. But in the meantime, the challenge we're going to have this turn is just this onslaught of panzers up the middle, heading straight for this hex. Now, I was thinking about how I could stop that, and we've got some pretty strong anti-tank units. So this, for example, this guy here, I'll just pop that there as a reminder. This guy here is an anti-tank unit, pretty strong, quite fast, and negates some of the benefit those panzers have in terms of armour superiority. Now you can assign these to a different division. There's a couple of counters that can be assigned to the 135th Rifles. And so what I thought I would do is I would assign those counters to these two anti-tank units just up here, and bring them down, making use of the terrain and parking them right in between the town of Lukaci and the panzers. I'm not sure how that's going to work, because unfortunately the rest of the anti-tanks are all the way over here, and I'm not going to trust to the luck of die rolls as to whether they can get themselves across the terrain that well. Last turn was a bit of a disaster, as you may remember me mentioning if you saw the previous video. Right, let's get going then. Interdiction's at 1, which has meant the Soviet formations are not as good as they could have been. And yeah, let's see if that plan works. As I mentioned in the last video, anyone who does have any suggestions of how the Soviets can counter this German advance, much appreciated. In the meantime, I'll crack on and I'll see you in a moment. Mid-turn then, turn 4. Wow, what an eventful turn it's been. The Soviets have burned through the majority of their activations already, and we've used them to reposition as best we can. And those forces we've repositioned have been the forces of the 87th Infantry, the fortified region, and the 41st Tanks. We pulled them back from Volodymyr Volynskiy, apart from the odd scattered unit or division. We actually tried to cut off the command path for the 13th Panzers by moving this bunch of tanks from the 41st, but unfortunately the Germans could still get a command path through. But it was very close, and very close here to almost disrupting the German panzers, but there is another unit underneath there to prevent that. The tanks of the 1st Anti-Tank Division there have moved into what I hope are slightly strategic positions around the rivers and the forests. Same here. And the 135th Infantry on the Soviets, these sort of black striped counters, have moved into the victory point hexes with the aim of trying to put a unit in as many of those hexes as possible to try and hold on and stop the Germans taking those victory point hexes. I think it's going to be almost inevitable that the Germans are going to get most of the way across the map now. I think it's going to be a case of denying German victory rather than winning it through aggressive tactics, shall we say, although we do have those counters to spend in the next turn for those counterattack orders. The Germans, for their part, have far more activations left. For whatever reason, the initiative rolls were all very favourable towards the Russians, and although I could, as the Soviet player, have handed the initiative over to the Germans to force that activation, the Germans would have just ploughed through and been in an even more advantageous position if they had been able to do that unchecked through the repositioning and the use of the terrain that I've tried to do. So very sort of rock and a hard place type scenario for the Soviets in this turn, much as it has been throughout most of the game so far, to be honest. But the Germans then, they have moved, the 13th Panzers have now reached the edge of Lukachi. The 299th Infantry are about to try and take back that town. Although that's going to be tricky because this unit here is severely under strength, and there's a negative die roll modifier for attacking across the bridges into this town just here. What else have we got? These isolated units down here, they're not disrupted, so if we did move these units of the 111th out of the way, they could potentially come back into command and out of isolation. So what I did was I tried my best to disrupt and remove the activations for that 124th HQ unit just there, which we did successfully. That was helpful, but it does mean that these guys are not really moved very much, or haven't moved very much. Meanwhile, from Volodymyr Volynskiy, we have pushed the 298th out into the countryside surrounding Volodymyr Volynskiy, and we really have now opened up the road for the 14th Panzers, something that probably should have happened 2 turns ago, but there you go. So anyway, moving into the final parts of the turn, the Germans do have 6 full formation activations for those 14th Panzers, plus around about 6, if not 7 activations for the other units between them, or the other divisions between them. So going to be a very busy turn for the German player, and a case of clinging on by the skin of your teeth for the Russians, because now we have the victory point hexes in the north of the map within our reach as the German player. End of the turn. Apologies if you can hear the truly vile English weather outside at the moment, but it's hammering on the roof. But hopefully you can still hear me. The turn has gone exactly as expected, with the Germans just overrunning the Soviets pretty much everywhere, with the vast number of formation activations that they had remaining pretty much meant that they were unchecked. The 14th Panzers moved all the way up, smashed through what remained of the defences there, and have now claimed this victory point hex here, which is called Werber. It's not a conditional hex, but if we are still the last unit in there at the end of turn 7, we will get points for that hex. However, we've gone across the border. There's a little dotted line, not sure if you can see that on the map, a little dotted line, which shows that we are at a certain point which trigger conditional reserves. Very, very few conditional reserves, but the Russians will get some additional reserves brought in now because we have crossed that line. And that would be conditional on us doing that before turn 6. It seemed far too easy for us to not do that, because they were just sitting targets, railroad and a road straight up here, 2 victory point hexes, third one there, with reinforcements coming on from this supply area. Next turn it just made sense to take that hex, even though there's going to be a few extra reserves come on. Panzers, meanwhile, have done what they do. The infantry have pushed up. The infantry down the bottom here have pushed forwards. These units here are now disrupted, or at least this unit here is disrupted, meaning that the I keep forgetting what that one is. I think it's the 299th have retaken Lakachi, and the trace of command line can be drawn around these units here. There's a couple of occasions where we need to go off-road, but we kind of managed to get there, so which means we've now got the conditional victory point there as well. Wherever the Panzers came into contact with the Soviet forces, the Soviets came off the worst with disrupted units, and now loads of destroyed units. So from the German point of view, the next few turns are going to be now all about getting those victory hexes, and there's a few dotted around here. Most valuable one's probably slightly off shot at the moment, but it's just kind of there. And then from memory, top of my head, if the Germans can get units out of that eastern edge of the map, they will get points for each unit that goes off. I'll have to double check that for next turn, but I think that's it. And that seems, unless there's something changes drastically, it seems almost inevitable that the Germans are going to completely overrun the entire map. I say it's inevitable, but maybe not. There's a whole bunch of reinforcements come on up the top here, so maybe something can be done next turn and the turn after. But we're past the halfway point now, and really this is the Germans' game, I think, unless the Soviet defences improve drastically. As I mentioned at the top of the video, not 100% sure how to do that, so any comments and so on would be useful, I'm sure, as to how I could possibly turn this around now for the Soviets. We shall see. In the meantime then, thank you for joining me again. Please click the like button, comment, subscribe if you haven't already, all that kind of thing. Every little thing helps the channel. And yeah, let me know if you want more series like this one that looks at these bigger games as a turn at a time, after action report kind of way of approaching the games. Okay, until turn 5, I'll see you soon.